Well, happy Sabbath, everyone. I'm Justin Young. It's a great honor and a pleasure to be here. So thank you, Carlene, for giving me a platform to speak, and thank you, Delvis, for running the tech. I just want to ask, first off, has anyone ever heard of the mobile application Yuka? Y-U-K-A? Okay, awesome. Well, that's wonderful. So today, I'll be going over informed consumerism, something that's extremely important today as we are in a very artificial and processed world. And as we try to live natural lives, it's paramount that we stay informed about what we're putting into our body, whether that's what we watch, what we hear, what we think, or what we eat, right? So I will usually say that I usually talk for about an hour when I instruct, so I'll try to keep this prompt. But yes, so I wanted to start out with some overarching principles that we can all relate to, some Seventh-day Adventist principles that I borrowed from reading Ellen G. White's literature, right? So the Ministry of Healing, Medical Ministry, and various volumes of testimonies for the church, right? A wealth of knowledge is in those things. But first, we can look at these 5 things: food as medicine or poison, temperance in eating, simplicity and natural foods, personal responsibility, and connection between diet and spirituality, right? I want to reflect and meditate on these things as one, food can be a medicine or poison depending on what we eat and how we prepare it, right? So temperance in eating, the church really harps on the fact that we shouldn't overindulge in what we consume. That includes food, that we should be moderate and temperate even in the way we eat. Simplicity in natural foods, there's a big emphasis on eating natural foods, right? We can see that as we go to potluck. There's an ample amount of beans, grains, vegetables, fruits, and all these things with not a lot of processed foods, and that's wonderful. Personal responsibility, this is kind of what I want to integrate the Yuka app into, because I think it's our personal responsibility to be informed in a way. In this day and age where it's very, very hard to get the critical information we need to make the right decision about what we want to put in our body, it's important that we inform ourselves, our family, our friends, and others in general about what we are doing to our temples, right? And the connection between diet and spirituality, Ellen G. White really reflected on this principle, saying that depending on what we eat is a direct reflection of how we feel and how we behave and what our relationship to God actually is. I almost said next slide again, but I have to do it myself. So there are a couple modern threats. In Ellen G. White's time, it was very different. It was very hard to see what was actually put into a food during her time. A quick example is for bread. A lot of manufacturers would put alum inside of their bread to make it a little bit heavier so that it would sell at a higher price, right? There wasn't really statutory things that say, okay, a manufacturer must disclaim everything they put into a product, but now we do have that luxury. But it's still very, very complex, which goes into the complexity of ingredient lists of when we're shopping. And I do want to point out that when we're shopping, the biggest thing we know about if something isn't really found in nature, there's a high likelihood that it will bear that mark on the right side, a barcode, right? So with that barcode should come an ingredients list, unless it's fruits or vegetables just packaged up for our convenience. But especially for processed foods, the ingredient list can be extremely long and include a lot of things that we don't know how to pronounce, that we don't know how it affects our bodies, and we don't know how it affects other things like medicines we may be taking or just general things like that. The use of artificial additives is a huge issue in today's world. There's a lack of transparency in supply chains, such as it's wonderful that we may be eating fresh beets all of the time and we can get them organic, but if we don't know where they come from, we don't know that they're riddled with heavy metals that may actually be taxing our livers, kidneys, and immune systems. Right? So a lot of that information is actually very important as well. A lot of nutrient is lost during processing, like fruit juices, They're heated up so that they're more shelf stable. That means they lose a lot of their valuable vitamins, right? And these are the vitamins that we need in our bodies to fight illness, prepare us for the future, and get us ready, give us energy. A lot of collective terms are used, such as spices. What's a good one? Spices, flavor, natural flavor. Those things, it is legal for manufacturers to do that if it's under a collective term, but what that means is that we don't actually know what's the components of those things. So those flavors could be things that we actually don't want in our bodies for spiritual or just informed reasons, right? So that's something to be very attentive about. And then the biggest thing is that there's a large emphasis on taste and convenience over nutrition. So it's very easy for us to be extremely busy in today's world and not actually pay attention to what we are putting into our bodies. But when you take a step back and you try to look at the nutrition, you find that a lot of things bearing this mark up there don't really have it because it's processed, it's been made shelf stable so that it won't rot as fast. These things are transported across state lines. It takes time. Sometimes fruits are made ripe within the store through chemicals, right? So there are a lot of modern threats, but the good news is that God provides and there are modern solutions, right? I almost said it again. Okay. So 2 big modern solutions is 1, reading ingredient lists and becoming very, very relaxed in knowing what the words mean. So that takes a lot of in-depth knowledge and research, a lot of community action, a lot of just staying informed. But the second thing is that there are tools to use, such as Yucca. There's another app called Trash Panda. There are different apps out there that kind of give a little bit of light about what's actually in the food. So I'll focus on the app Yucca because I personally enjoy it, and it was introduced to me late last year, and I love it and hate it at the same time because it tells you what's in your food, and sometimes you just don't want to know, right? So for Yucca, at this point, if you're on your phone, I will not be offended if you go on your phone and download this as I'm talking about it. I actually prefer that you do it, right? So Yucca's purpose is to inform consumers about what they're eating and to provide a kind of advocacy platform. And the way they do this is once you see a food on Yucca, it'll give you all the details. It'll tell you the things that are harmful for you, and it'll give you a little option to send an email to the manufacturer to say, these ingredients are harmful scientifically. We want you to take it out. So it has been driving a lot of change for consumerism around the world in the past couple of years, but it's a wonderful app to do that kind of thing. But the premise is you get this app on your phone, you go to a market, and you just scan the barcode. And once you scan the barcode, it's a community-driven app. So people that scan a barcode, if the product isn't recognized, they can scan the ingredient list, and Yucca will take those ingredients and tie them to scientific research and different things and make an analysis and assessment on what it actually is and how good it is for you. So that's extremely useful. But what it does do is it scores food using 3 criteria. 1 is the nutritional value, so like macronutrients that we're all aware of. So calories, sodium, protein, fiber, etc., you name it. It weighs those things and it gives it kind of a score. So if it has too much sodium and so few calories, it's going to get a really bad score, for example. It looks at the artificial additives that are in there, such as colorings, texturizers, things like that. And it looks at the organic nature of the product, how natural it actually is. So it gives you a composite 0 to 100 score for everything you can scan in a grocery store that is food. And then with that, it gives recommendations for healthy alternatives. So I know for a fact that Chips Ahoy, since I looked it up last night, are a 0. It's a 0 out of 100, right? It's extremely bad for you. Um, yeah, that's sad news, right? So only scan things you're willing to know is bad for you. But once you scan these things, it gives you a table at the bottom, and I'll bring up a demo a little bit later, but not a big one, because I know I'll be short on time. It gives you healthier recommendations. So instead of Chips Ahoy, it'll point you to these 10 other brands that kind of taste the same, have the same ingredients, but have a little less additives, has a little better composition for the macronutrients, and it may be a little more organic for you. So it's a very, very useful product to be, I don't know if this thing is good for me. I'm going to scan it. It has a 75 out of 100, which is pretty good. You know what? I can give this to myself and give this to my family instead of this thing I've been feeding myself with, which is actually a 0. So let's just move into a little case study. When I was a kid, I loved Pop-Tarts. I really, really love Pop-Tarts. Strawberry Pop-Tarts, the cinnamon ones, they're amazing, my mouth's watering, but it's wonderful. So this is kind of what happens when you scan the product. You would scan the barcode on the back of the Pop-Tarts box, and it would show you, okay, it's a 3 out of 100. It's clearly pretty bad for you. It even gives you a little red circle, just in case you understand that more than the number. But it tells you that there are 17 additives that are in there that aren't natural. It tells you that it's a little too sweet, 30 grams of sugar per serving, which I think is just one of the 2 Pop-Tarts, not necessarily both of them. And then the calories, it's just very, very high compared to the other nutrients it's delivering, because you don't want the ultra-processed food that gives you a lot of calories and no nutrients. So that's what it's basing those scores off of. It says the protein's actually okay for you. Fiber, saturated fat is pretty low, and the sodium's pretty low. So if you were looking at your sodium intake, but you didn't care about anything else, you could eat the Pop-Tarts if you wanted to. But also, once you click the additives, there'd be a drop-down that says More Info, and it'll give you a list of every single additive that is in that product, right? Extremely useful. So it'll tell you there are 3 food colorings, well, primary ones, and then there's caramel color, which can be like a conglomerate of different things. And then it goes into antioxidants, texturizing agents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which is extremely useful because you can click on each one of those because we don't really know what yellow 6 is. It might just sound like a dye, right? But these colors are extremely common, especially in food that we give to our children through the form of candy and well-colored foods that kids enjoy, right? So candies like M&Ms that have the different colors, Skittles, just different things that we get that are store-bought, that are processed, and they have an artificial color to it. So once you click those things, I prepared a few. So yellow 6, it's a coloring. Once you find it, of course, these things are backed by scientific research. So for yellow 6, blue 1, tertiary butylhydroquinone and monocalcium phosphate, it used research from the Food and Drug Administration, California State, California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, the European Food Safety Authority, and the Center for Science in Public Research, for example. So there are hundreds of articles about why these things are scored high-risk additives. For yellow 6, it says that it's a high-risk food coloring suspected of contributing to hyperactivity and attention deficit disorders in children. Could have an effect on male reproduction and the gut microbiota, and also may contain contaminants suspected of being carcinogenic. That's not something I would like to give my kids, but that's not the only high-risk thing on there. Blue 1, suspected of contributing to hyperactivity and ADD as well in children, believed to have genotoxic, cytotoxic, hematoimmunotoxic effects, may contain aluminum, which can accumulate in the body and contribute to various diseases. Not something I would also put in my body, especially because it has aluminum, and this really does cause a lot of bad effects on the body. The TBHQ, tertiary butylhydroquinone, Suspected of being carcinogenic at high doses, may have harmful effects on the immune system and increase vulnerabilities to infections like the flu. Potential of exceeding safe dosages in children. And by that, it is saying that it's extremely likely that if you feed children this often, that they will exceed that minimum safe dosage. And monocalcium phosphate, you'll find this in a lot of things, even bottled water, because they say electrolytes are included for taste. What they don't tell you is that those electrolytes are chemical additives just like this. So monocalcium phosphate, first part, the monocalcium and the phosphate. The phosphate is a huge issue for Americans because we generally eat way too much phosphate, which is very, very bad for our kidneys. A lot of our system is gunked up by over-consuming phosphate. But its high in American diets contributes to the disruption of bone mineralization because it stops that process which adds to the mineralization of our bones. So if we already have bone issues or we're at an age where we're losing that mineralization, phosphate intake is very, very harmful for us. Excessive phosphate intake. It's harmful on the kidneys, increased risk of cardiovascular disease, and the calcium, depending on the way it's sourced, which nothing will tell you, could be in the form of nanoparticles, which could accumulate in the body and cause a little bit more damage. So that's just 4 of those high-risk additives. It'll scare you once you see a lot of our favorite things that we like to eat, like Chips Ahoy and just little snacks, ice creams, things like that. But that's just a little case study, and that concludes my PowerPoint presentation. But I hope and pray that everybody can learn a little bit about being a more informed consumer. There are apps out there if you don't understand what an ingredient is, but it's paramount that we understand what we're putting inside of our bodies. That's all I have.